I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a hike through my backyard, good old rural Spain, as we aim to save the president's daughter and take down Las Plagas by ranking all 16 chapters in the Resident Evil 4 Remake. Each chapter is made up of multiple gameplay segments, like how old school Resident Evil was divided room by room, whereas RE4R is divided more by its areas. So I'll be dissecting all the segments of a chapter, looking at how I enjoyed them across my multiple playthroughs, and tallying them to come up with my final rankings. Of course, not all chapters are created equal, some are longer than others, some focus on very linear sequences, while others allow more freedom. In these cases, it'll come down to personal preference and opinion as to how I rank them, but suffice it to say, I love all the chapters in this game, given I was willing to get the Platinum Trophy and complete all the in-game achievements. However, the footage you will be seeing is of none of that. It is of my first blind standard run playthrough, so if you notice discrepancies between how I discuss the levels and the footage being shown, that is why. Forgive baby Billy. Without further ado, all 16 chapters of Resident Evil 4 Remake ranked, and be sure to leave your favourite chapter in the comments below. At the end of the day, there has to be a chapter at the bottom of my list, and of all the chapters in the game, it's 15 that I find myself least wanting to replay. My favourite aspect of Resident Evil games is, of course, the survival horror aspect, and to Chapter 15's credit, the sequence in the cold specimen storage with the regenerator body bags is quite chilling. On my first playthrough, I fell prey to the oldest trick in the book and had a rather harrowing fight in the claustrophobic confines of the room against a regenerator. But that's about the only aspect of Chapter 15 that I fully enjoy. That's because the rest is dedicated to run and gun action, baby. You've got the helicopter assault with Mike as he helps you gun down Ganados so you can progress towards the sanctuary. I like you can skip the anti-air cannon segment with a few well-thrown grenades. Otherwise, it's this tedious climb to the minigun while everyone and their mum shoots you with whatever weapons they got from Gariford on offer. The segment following, where you have to fend for yourself in the arena with the two miniguns, is at least better than the original. I recall getting stuck there in RE4, but in the remake I had no issues even on the hardest difficulties when multiple JJs appeared. Following this, I like the short segment prior to the specimen storage. The last of the blue medallions can be found here, a treasure or two as well, but then it's back to the action with Sanctuary Approach. I understand why these segments exist. It's the last major enemy segment before the game reaches its climax, so they throw as many Ganados as it takes to make you use all your fancy powered up guns. It's a power fantasy, and is more bearable this time around. But as I explained earlier, I'm just not the biggest fan of these action enemy killing set pieces. I'd rather have a handful of tougher enemies to overcome than swarms and swarms of Ganados, Novistadores, and whatever else they want to chuck at you. Chapter 15 does end on a high note though, with Leon carrying Ashley to Lewis's lab. All the while we see the hallucinations starting to get the best of our favourite American. On a first time playthrough, it hits really well, but after my 5th playthrough or so, I found myself wishing I could skip the sequence since you can't die in it, and it's a hold forward simulator while Leon limps slowly towards the light. It could have been a glorified cutscene. Up next, Chapter 16, the final chapter of the game. Aside from the Saddler boss fight and the island escape, the chapter is padded with a very brief explorable segment with Leon and Ashley going through the worn-down sanctuary. You're able to find a Los Iluminados pendant, as well as some extra lore on Luis in his lab, and Chapter 16 is a perfectly suitable ending for the game though. The Saddler boss fight was mostly improved over its original counterpart. It feels like a real war of attrition. The arena is more vast and destructible, Saddler's attacks feel more deadly and varied with tons that you can parry, dodge under, run away from. My only complaint are the Novistadors he can summon, because on higher difficulties, managing them when they can basically one-shot you as well as Sadler is infuriating, which is why I'll be buying the rocket launcher on every future playthrough. The second phase is also a nice cinematic moment, complete with one of my favorite Leon lines.
It's not me, it's you.
And I really enjoy the island escape. Seeing the Ganados dying out on the ground due to the loss of their host is a nice visual way of explaining how everyone with Las Plagas is no longer a threat. And that jet ski segment is pure bliss once you've memorized the layout. Nothing more satisfying than nailing the escape damageless and performing tricks off every ramp. Especially on Professional, where you end with maybe 5 seconds or so on the clock as you escape. But like, every other chapter just has more content, so in that sense, Sadler's Last Stand never had a chance at making it high on this list. Before we get to the next entry, did you know only 85% of my viewers aren't subscribed? Let's rectify that. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers on this channel by the end of the year, and I know we can do it. So parry that subscribe button for more gaming ranking videos. Next up is Chapter 5, From the Church to the Cabin. This is your first portion of the game escorting Ashley, and from an atmospheric perspective, it's actually fantastic. The chanting of the villagers as they ransack the church searching for you is unnerving and freaky. Ashley as a character is fantastic in the remake, and even in this early chapter, we see a nice little character arc form. From being deathly afraid and requesting a rest mere minutes after escaping the church, to her lamenting why is this happening as they reach the farm, only for her to grow and help save Leon and Luis in the cabin, starting her growth arc from timid, terrified college student to an absolute badass in her own right by the end of the game. Controlling Ashley is pretty fun, albeit it takes time to get used to. But on subsequent playthroughs, I found no issues getting Ashley from point A to point B. So why is this chapter ranked so low on my list? Well, it contains 2 of my least favorite segments in the game. The first is an optional merchant mission. As it's optional, it doesn't quite factor in as highly as my other reason, but we'll get to that. Let's talk about the Savage Mutt. Even on standard mode, this guy is brutal, a Blaga Doggo that knows how to attack both from ranged and up close. I know there's a knife cheese you can use against him, and you know I love my premium queso, but that doesn't change how I would rather just skip this fight if I have the option. It's insane that people on Professional S+ think that killing him is more viable than collecting the blue medallions in the castle entrance. Whew. But secondly, and perhaps most infamously, let's talk about the cabin. You can split this section into 3 phases. The lower cabin, where you need to kill enough enemies to board up all 3 windows, the upper cabin, where the villagers start using ladders to climb into the building, and then the cow brute, being the boss of this section, and once killed, the cabin ends. On my first standard playthrough, I got stuck here for a while. Multiple attempts, my boyfriend who was watching me play had to calm me down because I was getting very tilted. You see, I'm not the biggest fan of how easy it is for the Ganados to just pile up and gang up on you once inside the building. You can get attacked by one enemy, only to then get whacked by another without any chance to parry. Stun-locked damage is never fun. I especially despise the unarmed Ganados who can grab you because there's no reliable way to avoid their attacks. I know you can duck underneath them, but it doesn't feel like it works half the time. It feels like forced damage for the sake of forced damage. And on higher difficulties, it turns this from challenging but doable to a complete spin of the wheel, a roll of the dice. There's no skill involved, no guaranteed method to doing well, and that's just not my cup of tea. Especially when the ladder cutscene happens and the game just decides to auto-spawn a Ganado upstairs to fuck with you. Take that guy out of the equation and give Leon the chance to kick the ladders down, and that second phase becomes way more bearable as a result. I also have to laugh at the Ganados who come down the fucking chimney, that's so cruel. Luis is a godsend here though, able to free you from grabs, and when enemies target him, that sets you up for a stealth kill on them from behind. but none of this changes how I feel. This section fails to find the line between overwhelming yet fair and overwhelmingly bullshit, and I've done this section like 7 or 8 times now, and that's just how I feel. That's my opinion. This next chapter has a similar trajectory to chapter 5. Solid atmosphere, fun sequences, but then 1 or 2 aspects that just ruin my desire to replay them. So come on in, chapter 10. Taking place after Ashley is kidnapped by the Verdugo, Leon has to race to the throne room to save her, only to find himself thrust into the bowels of the castle, ending in an intense fight against Salazar's right hand. Sad that line didn't make it into the remake. Now, I should preface, on standard difficulty, a majority of the game is perfectly fine, easy to handle with the exception of 2 or 3 instances. It just so happens that one of those exceptions is the infamous dual Garrador fight before the throne room. It's set up similarly to the original, where you have to deal with the 2 Garradors alongside a series of cultists, and your goal is to kill them, get their unicorn horns, and unlock the door to the next room. However, unlike in the original games, where the cultists are fairly predictable in their movements, in the remake, the cultists have such an advanced AI and move extremely fast on higher difficulties, making it so much more difficult to manage them on top of the Garradors. And the cultists respawn far too much for my liking, giving this overwhelming energy to the room that just isn't fun to die to constantly. I like that you can lead the Garradors into the cultists, making them kill each other, but ultimately I'd have preferred just a straight up duel between Leon and the 2 Garradors using the bells on the wall to lure them, while getting those shots just right to take them out. Instead, this room is my most dreaded to replay without any infinite ammo, and has killed me about the same amount as the cabin did in the last chapter. The ballroom prior is a lot of fun, the Novistadores in the environment are a unique enemy type since they can blend into the rubble, creating some fun jump scare moments. On higher difficulties, you have to take the ballroom at a slower pace, ensuring you wipe out every bug before they can hit you, because their damage output can be insane. On Professional S+, this room becomes a nightmare though, as 1 or 2 mistakes forces you to reload your save to ensure you have the healing to handle the dual Garradors later on. There's also an optional weapon to find in the library you went through as Ashley the chapter prior, as well as a secret boss fight against a golden armored Blaga, which you can kill for the merchant. Pretty cool encounters in my opinion. The true saving grace of chapter 10 though is the final third beneath the castle. The Novistadores in the water that you can parry before they hit you are fun, you get your first ancient crown, the best treasure in the game, and it ends with easily my favourite boss fight in Resident Evil 4 and perhaps the Resident Evil series, the Verdugo. Fun fact, in the OG game, Verdugo fucking terrified me, and in the remake, they absolutely nail this Mad Lad's unique blend of horror. It's like being stalked by a xenomorph. The sound design of its claws scrabbling along the metal above you, the way you have to leg it to a coolant jet with him running at you from behind, the absolutely awesome feeling of parrying his tail attacks with your knife before unloading into his lanky body. I wanted to feel afraid, and they did exactly that. Once you know the strategy for defeating him, he does become easier to take down and thus less threatening, but I got my scares on my first playthrough and that alone deserves praise. I just wish he wasn't tied to one of my least favourite chapters. You know what? I'm actually sad to be putting chapter 12 this low on the list. Emerging from the mines, you race to the clock tower to ultimately put Salazar down. But first, one of my favourite extra missions. If you head back to the throne room, you can deface the portrait of Salazar by throwing an egg at it. And if you keep the golden egg you receive in that same room, you can use it during the boss fight to do major damage to Salazar, and depending on the difficulty, maybe even kill him outright. And of course, you can sit on the throne itself for a classic RE4 Easter egg. Aside from brief backtracking, this chapter is quite short, revolving around climbing the under construction clock tower, and I had a giddy old time when I entered and saw the Salazar statue back in full force. It isn't chasing us this time, a true tragedy, but having it be a flamethrower was a nice subversion of expectations. I also like that for observant players, you can blow the head up if you notice the explosive barrel peeking out the back, something I did not realize in my first playthrough, of course. This is followed by the giant spiked ball death traps, and then the infamous elevator. The remake elevator is a lot of fun, as the enemies are all scripted. You can plan your climb, ensuring that nobody lands on this lift. And there's an in-game achievement for it too, so go nuts. Though for a first playthrough, just focusing on making it to the top is enough. Having the Gloria las Plagas cultists distracting you is also a nice extra touch, which can cause you to miss a shot and have a cultist land on the platform if you're not careful. I do have to wonder why they included a fragile floor mechanic for this minuscule portion of the outside scaffolding. It feels so weirdly out of place and could have been a more interesting mechanic in a larger environment where you have to maybe make your way across shaky flooring while being sniped from afar by cultists. Then there's the boss fight with Salazar. I honestly kinda miss the original flower design he had before. This time he looks like the playable alien from Carrion, though his dialogue throughout the fight is top notch. He has a learnable moveset, a large variety of shakeups to his moves that keeps the player on their toes. It took me a while to learn how to handle him. Is it my favorite fight ever? No, it can be a bit tedious with how often he moves around the arena, but there is something very satisfying about watching him slump to the floor when you stun him, followed by his dialogue turning from mocking to pure anger in an instant. This man got bullied as a kid, and as someone else who got bullied when I was younger, yeah, he deserved it. What takes this boss over the edge though is the music. Something about RE4 Remake is that the music, the soundtrack for all of the bosses, shockingly good. Krauser, Verdugo, El Gigante, but my favorite one is Salazar's, an absolute banger to end the castle on. On higher difficulties, you can also get ambushed by a couple of knights before the jet ski, but they're easy to avoid. They don't exist on standard. A short but solid level that only falls in the bottom half of my list because it just needed more content. The final chapter to miss out on my top 10, Chapter 2 is a fun little slice of the village that sees you without your gear as you knife your way through 3 ganados to reclaim your prizes, before making your way to the mayor's house to get back to the main square. Already, bonus points in this chapter's favor for introducing the merchant, who is absolutely fantastic in this game. He oozes personality, and while his accent isn't for everyone, I love a good bit of Cockney in my games. Gun rhymes were fun, stranger. However, this chapter suffers from having one of my least favorite areas in the game, the Windmill Valley, also known in the fandom as Dynamite Alley. The original starting point for this chapter in RE4, it's been repurposed in the remake as this stronghold of sorts, where you need to find an emblem, open the exit, and escape. On standard difficulty, it's actually a ton of fun. It's your first taste of the overwhelming amount of enemies coming your way, forcing you into a very early fight or flight mode. And the way I spent my time rushing around the confines of the arena looking for how to progress and/or escape was pretty memorable. This area loses points dramatically though on higher difficulties, because many of the enemies use dynamite to try and blow the main character up. On standard mode this is bearable because you can survive at least one blast most of the time. On hardcore and up, the Ganados have aimbot and you're 100% going to burst into a shower of gore whether you like it or not. I memorized the, at the time of playing, best route through this area, and even then, so many factors can go awry if the game feels like it. You can stun an enemy only for them to still grab you because why the fuck not? Some Ganados may choose to run faster than they should because why the fuck not? You might get one-shot by a surprise attack you couldn't have predicted because why the fuck not? It's an absolute nightmare, an early run-ender, and has the consistency of my 10 years on YouTube. Yep, that's a self-roast. On the plus side, the rest of this chapter is a lot of fun. There's a surprise appearance from Dr. Salvador that had me panicking my first run, while on future playthroughs, it's fun to just run past him and let him trigger the tripwire behind his spawn. Then the mayor's house is a nice brief rest. You can bother the Ganado in the toilet like in the original game, although I did forget to do that in my first playthrough. The puzzles are the same across all difficulties, so it's quick to jump in and solve them, and there's a brief moment with a broken neck plaga that can definitely catch you unawares if you're not prepared for it. all ending in a classic cutscene that continues to set the tone for the unstoppable Vitores Mendes. If there was ever a chapter in this game that feels like filler, Chapter 8 would be the prime candidate. You've just been separated from Ashley after Sadler's sneaky little hijack, and your goal is to work your way around the castle's outer battlements to reach the portion of the castle she's in. This was how it worked in the original game as well, albeit with Ashley getting kidnapped in a much dumber way. But here, I think the progression feels more linear and fillery because the second half of the level really slows to a crawl. But let's start with the good. The introduction of the red cultists, Gloria a las plagas, chanting in the background, was perfect. You see this ominous room with corpses, and to progress you need a lantern, wielded by the lead zealot. What we then discover is that their chanting allows them to activate the plagas in the lesser enemies, creating an absolutely deadly scenario. Most of the plagas in this segment are the big kind, with the mouths that can bite off Leon's head, so if you're out of flashbangs, good luck to you, my man. This area was chaotic in the best way, as you chase around the Red Zealot and pump him full of lead. There's a chandelier you can drop, but every time I did this area, I forgot it was there until the end of the fight. This is then followed by a reunion with Ada Wong. I personally prefer the campiness of the original RE4 for this specific scene, and on my initial playthrough, this portrayal of Ada wasn't quite doing it for me, but upon reflection and giving myself actual time to process things, I actually really like Lily Gao's performance. This is a more realistic Ada, certainly all business, and keeps her emotions very close to her chest. But you can see she certainly cares about Leon, and I like the almost nonchalant attitudes they have towards each other. Makes Leon less of a lovesick puppy and puts them together more as rivals with a mutual respect. Then we get to the battlements, which is where I feel the filler comes in. Yes, we're introduced to a new plaga type, very face-hugger-esque, and I will refer to them as spine-huggers for the rest of this video. This area serves to showcase the danger of the spine-huggers and how the enemies they possess can very quickly close distance. Shotguns at the ready, kids. But then we have this sun-moon door puzzle, which is the fillery part of this area. You have to flick the levers to alternate the doors to make your way over to the next tower. It's valid and decent gameplay, but once you know the trick to opening the initial tower door you start in by shooting the weight through the gate grate, there's no going back. There's another El Gigante encounter, which is a fun set piece, and you get to shoot it down with a cannon, that's good stuff, but it doesn't really stick out in my mind, and that's okay. I bet some people love this sequence and would rank this chapter higher because of it, and that's totally cool. This chapter ends with a genuinely touching scene between Leon and Ashley that cements her as this multi-layered individual who truly cares about Leon. I get strong younger sister, older brother vibes, and I like to think they keep in touch following Resident Evil 4. So I originally had Chapter 7 ranked at the bottom of my list, purely because the water room on any mode that isn't standard is genuinely awful. The amount of crossbow wielders who will aimbot you to death without you having a chance to line up a shot back is actually straight up unfair. Especially after returning to the main part of the water room with the valve and seeing 5 crossbow wielders spawn in like...
One shot, one kill.
Which is a shame, because water room on standard is the perfect level of difficulty and almost made me think they'd redeemed this infamous location from the original game. I love the different elevations they play with, having you go downwards to the lower room, then back up, then to the Ashley segment, which was much easier this time around, felt relatively painless on the easier difficulty. However, for as much as I despise this room, especially after my platinum runs, the rest of this chapter is extremely fun and certainly makes a great first impression for the castle that saves it from being bottom of my list. Everything up to the catapult segment is amazing. Ignoring my current footage that shows me getting blown up by the catapults and needing my boyfriend to be like, "Did you see the explosive barrels?" I really enjoy going through this area knowing the best way to tackle it now. Hitting the blue medallions early, raising the cannon before triggering the first catapult, using said cannon to take out the few catapults I couldn't blow up with barrels, etc. It's just a dynamic set piece and a great intro to all the new Zealot enemy types. Salazar's introduction is also quite something. The mini Margaret Thatcher looks so much more creepy now, and I love that once you clear out his little welcome party, you're immediately forced to trek through the dungeon and come face to face with the infamous Ganador. Now, I do have a few opinions on this fight. I love the concept of the Ganador. I think my first fight with him was well handled, tense, and so much fun. I also love the achievement for killing him knife only, nice addition. But on higher difficulties, even when I was standing still or not making sounds, it felt like the Ganador would home in on my location, and it just felt a bit unfair. Constantly, I'd approach from behind, silently, and before I get the chance to stab or do anything, he'd turn around, even when the prompt appeared. The AI just feels programmed to vaguely follow the player regardless, and that bothers me because it's not a truly blind enemy in that case. I do like that the arena changes depending on the difficulty though, adding more barricades to the room that you have to move around. And the puzzle after with the 4 swords is nice, as is the cute chandelier moment between Leon and Ashley. I think we all agree that this was when Ashley truly came into her own as a character, and in my mind, surpassed the original. Which makes the moment Sadler controls her upon the chapter's end even more tragic. Poor girl. When I think about the way this remake really changed things up, I think about chapter 3 in the village, because the route is almost identical to the original game, but the order of events has been shifted and changed ever so slightly to provide a fresher experience. From the moment you leave the mayor's house and discover that you can, in fact, save the dog, unless you're me, in which case you completely missed the sound cue on your first playthrough and was forced to record footage of your boyfriend's playthrough to get the doggo saved because your speakers didn't have surround sound and didn't tell you that the doggo was whining in your ear. Ha ha ha. To the way you enter the town square and suddenly the fucking tower explodes, collapsing and cutting off your path to the church. I like this change because it's so sudden and striking, while also being a great way to split the village square apart map-wise. It makes the tunnel beneath the village more viable as a traversal option, and forces you to interact with the houses to make progress. The church door leads to this ominous indoor area, complete with a mist machine generating a nice fog, and a skull that looks like it's ripped straight out of Bloodborne, before you then head the road to the church. I'm happy to actually report that the Iglesia is identical to the original game, and the path down to the El Gigante arena is also fairly unchanged. However, the merchant's hideout is now on the main path, introducing you to the wonders of this game's shooting gallery. And let me tell you, the one thing I wanted from this remake was the opening Spanish music from the original game with the female vocalist. And it wasn't in the Chapter 1 introduction. So when I hit the bonus stage in the shooting gallery, I was so happy.
There you go. Oh. Whoa.
Oh, the music!
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, I'm so happy. So you're expecting to now emerge into the fish farm next, but instead, we're already at the lake. The fish farm is now on a path to the left and has a similar setup to the Windmill Valley from Chapter 2, where you'll need to make your way to the back of the area, collect an item, and then make your way back to the entrance. It's a twisty, winding, water-filled, ramshackle farm filled with ganados, tripwires, and a brute for good measure, easily my favourite part of this chapter. There's a lot to find here, and I really like speedrunning this section. It makes me feel accomplished when I escape with barely a scratch. And fun fact, it's also worth doing this way because if you come back here in Chapter 4, all of the enemies despawn so you can collect blue medallions, treasures, and vipers at your leisure. The only downside to this chapter is the boss fight. Del Lago is... well, it's Del Lago. For a first playthrough, he's fantastic, but on subsequent playthroughs, it's a time sponge where your weapon upgrades do you no good because you're using harpoons and the same damage as everyone else. It's possible to kill him in one cycle, but incredibly hard to pull off. I think the fight is certainly better than its original counterpart, but it's still the fight I have the least urge to replay following that first experience. But that's okay, they can't all be winners, and I'll remember those first panicked moments fondly as I tried to spear the fish into a watery grave. In terms of dynamics, nothing quite beats the buddy cop mentality of Chapter 11. Teaming up with Luis to take on the mines beneath Castle Salazar, it's here where he slowly allows himself to let down his guard, growing more and more attached to the Spanish researcher, and we all know how that turned out. My favorite detail is Luis in the shooting gallery, supporting Leon, but also having one of the most extra chilling poses that makes my gay heart flutter. Man's got Riz, am I right, fellow kids? And he uses that charm throughout, helping you against the villagers in the Dynamite Cavern, giving you directions in the minecarts, helping you shoot down Novistadores, and having a starring moment during the Duel Gigante boss fight. The Dynamite Cavern was the area I died the most on my first professional playthrough, because while I call it the Dynamite Cavern due to you needing to collect TNT to progress, it's also just a bitch because enemies hang out on higher platforms chucking dynamite into the arena. I got very careless, but upon learning the speedrun strategy to get through the room, I had a lot more fun. Just run up the stairs to the left immediately, stun the one enemy, use a flashbang on the Bella sister, activate the bridge, run downstairs and out, then leg it up the stairs on the far side and ground yourself at the top. Hold off the enemies until the bridge lowers and then either kill all the enemies or make a run for the dynamite chamber. It's pretty simple to execute and feels amazing to do, though tackling this room normally on standard mode has its charm. Just don't pull a Billy and do this. I'm certain that happens in the mine. Oh no.
No, you do the Verdugo. You come up the elevator. You come up in front of like the roof.
The Duel Gigante fight is as fun as it used to be. I do miss the ziplines from the original, but given Luis is used as a distraction until one of the Gigantes falls, it all balances itself out. In this playthrough, I melted the pair, but on future playthroughs, it was easier to just take them out via guns. I do love Luis saving the day by leaping on and hooking the TNT to the armored giant for Leon. The minecart section is a bit hit or miss. I think it's way better than the original, but it's scripted, so you're dealing with the same track and the same enemies no matter the difficulty, the only change being the damage they do to your minecart, so it feels a bit samey after the 4th or 5th playthrough, similar to Del Lago in that sense. The Novistador nest is alright, I like the way the enemies are hidden along the caves, and the small request to destroy the pulsating spots is easy enough, but it's Luis and Leon's banter that carries them through that segment to the Krauser knife fight. Poor Luis, can't catch a break. But the knife fight happening at the castle makes so much more sense for this game's pacing than getting randomly impaled by Sadler. And it makes Leon's desire to face Krauser that much more personal. The knife fight itself is fantastic, I love parrying in this game, and taking on Krauser on his own terms is super satisfying, especially on later runs where you're better at the mechanics. A great end to a super fun chapter, and a tragic end to the best character in the game. Just missing out on my top 5, we have Chapter 9. The only portion of the chapter that lets it down para mí is the hedge maze. Even when I know the dogs are about to attack from a specific spot, I still mistime my shots and find myself taking damage I shouldn't be taking. It's better than the original maze, more predictable, but I still can't say it's my favorite part of the game. Once you get into the main hall though and have to collect the 3 reliefs, everything gets so much better. First of all, you can take Ashley to the shooting gallery, and I love how into it she gets whenever Leon does well. We all could use a support Ashley in our lives to fist bump when we get a headshot. The 3 different rooms we have to enter have 3 distinct challenges that makes this feel like we're overcoming different trials, which is a gimmick I always love in games. The dining hall is a simple seating puzzle using the paintings on the far side of the room. I wish the paintings changed per difficulty, but I won't complain about being able to speedrun this room on subsequent playthroughs. The second room is an enemy gauntlet, where as you cross the bridge to the plaque, an enemy pulls a lever and lowers you into a room filled with plagas, combined with a red zealot causing the fodder enemies to transform, and you have a chaotic bloodbath filled with panic, frenzy, and a lot of flashbangs. My favourite aspect of this room, though, is that you can skip it. If you throw a flashbang at the platform where the lever is before tripping the cutscene, you can stun the cultist and the bridge won't lower, allowing you to mow the cultist down, get the key item, and escape without much effort. The third room, though, is perhaps my favourite. You have to handle these armoured knight plagas, and it's looking tough until Ashley begins to help from above, chucking blue lanterns at the armour to stun them so Leon can deliver the melee blow needed to knock the helmets off. It's a really cool moment of Ashley willingly stepping up to help Leon and proving herself more than capable of helping her rescuer to get the job done. You can also return to the entrance hall from Chapter 7 after finishing this room, as you get this special cube that opens all the cube cabinets throughout the castle, including the one we left back there.
You don't get carsick or anything, do you?
You're about to find out.
I did notice on PS4 that the cultists in the entrance hall don't always spawn in time when you arrive, maybe a little struggle on the game's part, but it's not a major issue anywhere else, so it doesn't affect my experience too much. The main reason this chapter ranks so high, though, is the brilliant expansion of Ashley's playable segment. A great time on your first playthrough, exploring the abandoned library, finding the Ring of Keys, and dodging Blaga-infested armor is so much fun as she searches for a way to free Leon. I especially love her "I am so done with armor" line, followed by the "didn't I just say I was done?" The sequence of having to run back to Leon without the lantern is especially harrowing. Though treasure hunters beware, there are treasures here only obtainable via Ashley, so don't skimp out on them if you're going for the achievement. My best part is how, if you've done this bit before, you can skip most of the segment entirely by entering the right time into the first grandfather clock you see, which also gives Ashley a small piece of extra dialogue when she goes down the stairs and hears the knights coming behind her, though be aware that the time is different between standard mode and hardcore and professional. It's the stuff like this that makes me so happy this game exists. It's the best chapter of the castle in my opinion, but shockingly, it doesn't make my top 5. Starting off my top 5 though, I'm very surprised to say, Chapter 6, Welcome to the Party. It's a shorter chapter that feels like a nice breather after Chapter 5 of the cabin, and gives you far more leniency when it comes to taking care of Ashley, ending in one of my favourite boss fights in the game. The first portion is this barricade of sorts created by the village to stop anyone from escaping, and it's here we have to take down a set of villagers guarding the door to the next area. This can be tackled in different ways. Take your time and snipe the ganados on the ledges from afar, stealth around and kill those closest to you, or just run in guns blazing and pray your shotgun can outdamage the villagers and the brute waiting for you. I like that you have some elevation to play with as well through the fighting areas in this level, with the end of this path littered with bear traps to stop players from foolhardily running to the exit. The second portion of the level though is where the real fun begins. After killing 2 patrolling enemies and having Leon mention just how quiet it is, you can stuff Ashley in a locker, loot the area, and then go for a crank needed to unlock the next gate. Only to be introduced to the Bella sisters and their chainsaws. Bella ciao, Bella ciao, Bella ciao, ciao, ciao. I'm glad they got a real moment to shine in this remake as their own mini-boss-like enemies. On standard mode, they actually go down fairly easily, but I like that even on harder difficulties, they're not incredibly tough, unlike some of the game's bosses, and even some of the regular enemies. I liked flashbanging, then stabbing them in the back with my knives for high damage. There's a lot of space to move around in with such an open area with pathways up, different doorways, lots of dropping points. Feels like this could have honestly been the Mercenaries arena had the main village not been chosen instead. But this does lead to the one slight downside of this chapter. The chase with Mendez, which did not need to be there. I suspect many people running into the segment for the first time will get Ashley captured by the big cheese, because you can't really predict how many enemies will swarm you, or that there's explosives in the cart near the bridge, or that if Mendez grabs Ashley it's an instant kill, and a really cruel trick the game pulls is forcing your camera to face Mendez at the start of the segment, so you're thinking, oh, I should shoot him, when the reality is you should run away. Anytime the game hijacks your camera is a time I get annoyed because it almost never ends well for the player. Luckily, once you know the route, this little chase is simple and leads to one of the more fun boss fights in RE4R. But Torres Mendez can be tackled in many different ways, and I certainly brute forced his phase 1 on my first playthrough, but since learned that going to the top platform, dodging his attacks and shooting Le Big Eyeball on his back is the way to go. Nothing cooler than doing a knife attack by leaping off the top platform to plunge into his eye. His second phase though is where it gets fun, becoming a game of deadly space invaders where you have to dodge his projectiles while shooting the explosive barrels he picks up. If he approaches, you can shoot him to knock him out of his attack animations, but it's a close call. Sometimes he'll do attacks in either phase that require you to switch your elevation to avoid. There's a lot of variety for such a simple arena that I can't help but really enjoy what Mendez brings. And with his death, and the bridge to the village destroyed, the only way forwards is to the castle. A great ending to the first third of the game. The last time we visited the island was at the bottom of our list, and now just missing out on a podium finish? We have Chapter 13. The introduction to the final third of the game had a rather tough job, changing the way we thought about the endgame of Resident Evil 4 for almost 2 decades. The original release had a lot of criticisms related to the island and how it wasn't as well received as the first 2/3, but I'd like to think the remake actually took all those criticisms and fixed them, giving the island better pacing, taking out some of the more tedious parts, and adding a nice stealth element to the early portions of Chapter 13 to make it a lot more fun. I definitely enjoyed my time on the island more than in the original game, and that starts with this opening segment. Taking down the new soldier-type Ganados while dealing with the laser sight turrets was really cool. If you step in front of one of the turrets' line of sight, it's an instant kill, but as long as you play safe or lead other enemies into the line of fire, you can safely pass them in an instant. JJ is back, and instead of looking like a Spanish man in Rambo cosplay, he now looks like that boar guy out of Demon Slayer dressed in Rambo cosplay. I really like the new design, even if by this point in the game JJ isn't exactly a big threat. You can stunlock him easily with a fully upgraded shotgun, or for a speedrun tip, lead him into the turret's line of fire at the gate he spawns at, which will allow you to open the gate and skip the first portion of the level at your leisure if you time it correctly. The second half of this segment is way easier to just run through. There's a guy with a rocket launcher you'll want to take out, but here you're introduced to the metal shield enemies, and I still don't like them. They're so awkward to fight. I get they're meant to be hard, I respect their difficulty, I just don't enjoy them. Once you make it through the double doors, you can head into the main facility or stop off and kill some enemies along the way for an extra crown treasure. Fighting through the halls to rescue Ashley is pretty standard stuff, but anyone who's played the original game knows that there is something lurking in the shadows. And as you pass the classic Furnace Ganado, good to see he's still there, and head into the decrepit lab, you hear a laboured breathing. I think we were all worried about how they would handle the regenerators in the remake. They were the scariest enemy in the original game, and one of the scariest enemies full stop in gaming history. The ragged breaths, the droning music, the jerky movements. This section was perfect. You have to switch the power to access different rooms and upgrade your keycard to escape the lab. All the while, once you collect your keycard, it begins.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
What are you?
But the body's not gonna do anything. Ah!
Yeah, there's no way for me to know where...
Yeah, but they shoot the legs or something to like make him drop.
I also don't know how fast it's going to be moving towards me, so...
Gotta switch the power over.
Oh, you can't... Oh my god, they run fast! No! Also, if you view the regenerators in the model viewer, notice how they are not only caked up, but they've also got fucking jiggle physics. This game, man. Somebody had to work on that. Escaping the lab, you're finally given the heat scope and have to use it to figure out which of the 4 regenerators in the pods has eaten the wrench needed to access the final keycard. It's a fun little puzzle and you have to watch how you fight, otherwise you might break another pod open and cause a real party. But it's fine, because once you start upgrading your keycard, the true fiesta begins, as Ganados swarm the lab, some throwing grenades, happily releasing the extra regenerators while you have to wait for your keycard to finish installing the latest Windows update. It's tense, exciting, and the rush for the exit left me breathless as I circled back to Ashley and rescued her from her cell. This really was a chapter that built up to a terrifying climax, the roller coaster going up and up until you hit a sharp, terrifying drop with the regenerators. And yet for consistent quality, it's what happens next that really gets me going. Our bronze medalist is Chapter 14, the final Ashley escort level and the last island on this list. You'll have to put all your knowledge on full display to take on the terrors that lurk in the island facility. And I love every second of it. From the moment you step outside and find yourself underneath this construction site, weaving through enemies, sniping more blue medallions, and working your way back into the facility. There's a brief segment where Ashley will get kidnapped and the kidnapper will jump out of a window with her, which definitely confused me my first playthrough. It's a fun little sequence, but it's what follows that really makes this level so good for me. We enter the sewage drain and get a cute bit of dialogue between our deuteragonists, before telling Ashley to hide in a locker as we face yet another regenerator. The genius way in which they set you up in a claustrophobic and narrow corridor so that you have barely any room to escape once it makes eye contact with you is terrifying. But nothing compares to seeing it go Iron Maiden mode and become extra cuddly, looking to turn you into a pincushion. The introduction of the Iron Maiden feels way more out of nowhere in the best way in this remake, and this sets up the garbage heap segment next spectacularly. Anyone who played the original knows that at some point in this section, an Iron Maiden is going to join the party. What I wasn't expecting was the normal Ganados soldiers coming to kidnap Ashley down the hall. On my first playthrough, I panicked hard, and with both a regenerator and Ganados, my attention was split and Ashley ended up getting kidnapped. I learned on subsequent playthroughs though that if you just leg it back to the bridge Ashley is holding up at the start of the cutscene, you can likely cross it before a Ganado reaches her, though on professional difficulty I think the enemies move faster so it doesn't work. On the plus side, Ashley can drop the regenerator following you into the abyss if it tries to cross the bridge while she's holding it up, which is super awesome. And if you stay still when the Ganados first spawn, the regenerator won't even activate, giving you ample time to handle the situation. This ultimately leads to one of Ashley's best moments, the Wrecking Ball. Ashley, taking the reins and putting herself in the hero position, begins to break down the wall leading to the progress elevator by driving a construction vehicle. This is so much cooler than the on-rails driving segment from the original game in my opinion, and is a fun tower defense segment for those who enjoy that kind of content. Or you can just be me in future playthroughs and use a few grenades I saved on the wall before Ashley's first swing, which will cause the wall to break immediately, saving you tons of time. The option to do either is there, and I love that. Now, in my first playthrough, I missed the extra mission with the crazy strong regenerator back in the labs, so I have no footage of it for this video, but note that I think it's a great way to cap off the ultra strong enemy missions, and I'm shocked that guy wasn't used as a mini-boss in Mercenaries mode. The little chat with Ashley on the elevator where she fantasizes about being an agent with Leon was also adorable, especially the way Leon doesn't shut her down but does that thing like a sibling or parent where you go along with what they're saying but don't feed into it too much. #relatable. It really makes that moment at the start of chapter 16 where Ashley says, "We're a team, aren't we?" that much more powerful. All of this was enough to make this a top tier chapter, but then we follow it up with the Krauser boss fight in the ruins. I always loved the concept of needing to work your way around the ruins in the original game, and in the remake, Krauser's turned this whole place into a fucking Ninja Warrior course. My love of game show obstacle courses really shining through here as I make my way across this Wipeout, CBBC Raven, Legends of the Hidden Temple, Jungle Run looking ruin. Krauser and Leon's banter the whole fight is just filled with tension and history. As a fan of Darkside Chronicles for the Wii, getting all of this exposition on Operation Javier, having another tense knife fight with Krauser, and then getting to battle his super form atop the classic ruins from the original game, I mean, come on now. I recall someone online saying Krauser sounds like he's about to call you a slur with his tone, and especially with the
I can't wait to see you ride!
I can see it. Stellar voice acting from Mike Kovac, well done. It's a shame this final phase of Krauser's fight can be cheesed by climbing to the upper platform and running away from him, so he does his slow walk towards you, which allows you to snipe his legs and stun him. If he gets close, jump back down, dodge his AoE attack, and rinse repeat, ending in the classic trope where Krauser calls Leon by his name right as he dies. Perfection. Now let's see if he returns in the Ada DLC. The silver medal goes to the chapter that had the toughest job going into this remake, and that's chapter 1. There's a reason why half of this opening chapter was featured in the game's demo, because the opening to Resident Evil 4 is one of the most iconic pieces of gaming media in the industry. And it's safe to say that the remake followed up that original blueprint almost perfectly, improving so many areas and creating a more streamlined sequence that flows better into the rest of the chapter. Now, I went over my thoughts in the demo first impressions video I did before the game's launch, link in the top right corner, so I'll just be paraphrasing here, but I love that the hunting lodge is a full explorable home. The holes in the walls that let you see into the other rooms is a nice touch. I'm sad the 270-degree turn from the original game's first ganado was cut, but I like what we got here instead with good old Don Jose. The basement sequence was a nice touch, forcing us to work our way out when things go south, and the brief stealth segment was fun the first time until I learned you can just run down the hallway and the enemies won't see you until it's too late for them. The village trek is shorter this time around, but more atmospheric. There's a couple of enemies to either fight or run past, and this leads nicely into the village fight itself. From a pure iconic perspective, the opening village sequence is the most memorable part of Resident Evil 4, and here they certainly made it just as memorable. Though it does suffer on higher difficulties from the same bullshit as the cabin and the water room from much earlier in the list. Ganados become trained assassins who can grab and stunlock you with just one wrong mistake. There's almost no continuity between runs, so even if you have a tried and tested route through the village, there's no guarantee it will always work. You may be relying on random chance with some of the breakable chests to get weapons or healing needed to survive long term. You have the shotgun house to hide in if you need a quick break and a stronger weapon to help take down the horde, but your best bet is to just ride out the time limit. It's not worth holding up and trying to kill 15 enemies on higher difficulties, when at most you'll be missing out on 4 minutes or so of playtime. Still, the frantic nature of the entire village bearing down upon you remains no matter the difficulty, and I always find myself on the edge of my seat when facing the Ganados, even when I have infinite ammo weapons. It's that traumatic for me. This ends with the classic Leon line we all know and love before transitioning into the rest of Chapter 1. I was really pleasantly surprised to find that, for the most part, the farm had an identical layout to the original game, down to the placement of the barns and even some of the blue medallions. They kept the treasure you have to avoid landing in the muck to raise its value, nice, but they streamlined progression by having the path you need to take leading towards the fishing village also leading towards the cabin from Chapter 5. No more weird split paths from the farm, which allows them to create the cog puzzle and set up the first brute encounter well. Nothing really prepares you for your first run-in with the big guy and his hammer, and I definitely got my head cracked a few times. On repeat runs, he's fun to take down, and you can cheese him using the ladder leading to the upper level, as you can just shotgun him off every time he nears the top. Simple stuff. The QuickTime boulder was removed in place of a timed explosion that definitely caught me off guard in my first playthrough. I do weirdly miss that cheesy boulder chase though, and this leads through the tunnel to the fishing village, where we get our first taste of dynamite, bear traps, and tripwires in one location. It's like navigating shark-infested waters, and you'll have to adapt on the fly if you want to survive. Beware the dynamite on higher difficulties. I've accidentally died here on my S+ professional run because I got cocky and had to redo the whole chapter from scratch, not fun. There's a locked door you can't access, so the only path is through the house, but our expectations are subtly subverted. In the original game, when we hear banging, it's coming from Luis locked in a wardrobe. Here, the banging is coming from a ganado trying to get into the crawl space beneath the house. Kill him, hop down, and we find Luis starting the bromance with some great banter. I, honest to God, laughed when I heard Luis mutter joder under his breath. It's one of my favorite Spanish phrases my boyfriend has taught me, and it really validated that they're using proper Spanish and not like Mexican Spanish this time around. I do miss Leon's super extra roundhouse kick from the original game at Mendez, but getting flung across the cave is more realistic, so it's fine. A great end to a stellar opening chapter that really introduces you all to the mechanics you need to know, while giving you an experience that's similar, yet intriguingly different to the original game. Our gold medalist, the best chapter of RE4 Remake. It just so happens to be Chapter 4, how fitting. You've awakened in a boathouse, it's dark, and the only way forwards is through the woods. You duck under a cave, and then that sequence happens. The first plaga is revealed to you. If you're a speedrunner, it's completely possible to just run past this guy, but let's be real, first time players, I know you're gonna panic. I had no idea the specific enemy was made slightly harder than the other plagas to emphasize the threatening nature of the new threat. Hopefully you have a flash grenade? Taking on the new plaga enemies, we find the church key, and it's here where this chapter does something truly special, something I haven't seen since I played RE5. You're given the boat and told, go explore. There are 2 locations you need to visit, but there are tons of extra areas you can check out with treasure, new items, the Red 9 handgun, Chicken Island, and you can revisit the fishing village from Chapter 1. It's like giving you a small slice of open world gameplay that isn't too large, but still feels expansive enough to have an impact on the player. This is the sort of gameplay I'd like to see games play around with more. We don't need so many open world games, but I wouldn't complain about games experimenting with short form open world levels in their not open world games. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. The main cavern you explore to get the first key item for obtaining the church key is infested with plagas and ganados, and they start off by handing you a flash grenade, almost like they're trying to teach you a lesson, wink wink. This cavern is winding, and you can approach the enemies from a higher or lower level, which I like. The puzzle for unlocking the key item doesn't change between modes, and you have to figure out which symbols are painted along the cavern walls to open the gate. The other key item is obtained from where the secret merchant shack used to be in the original game, which is gone now, as you have a dock connected to the merchant's main hideout you can access at any time. The wreckage in the center of the lake has the Red 9 pistol, which is a favorite in the community, while Chicken Island to the side has a golden chicken egg you can sell to the merchant for a request. There's a lunker bass you can catch near the dock where you started the chapter as well for the same purpose, and you should fish. It's a good source of health, my boyfriend drilled that into me, and these fish saved my ass on higher difficulties. My favorite aspect of this open world though is getting to return to the Chapter 1 fishing village and collecting new treasure and lore along the way. If you go back to where you found Luis, you'll discover a treasure and a diary. The diary implying that the owner was related to Luis. Luis came from this village, a revelation that adds a whole lot more depth to his character. Behind an insignia door, you'll find 2 dead hikers, mentioned briefly in a note somewhere earlier in the game. The first is strung up like a ritual corpse, while the other is the sacrificed girl from the game's opening cutscene, and the forest altar is a creepy location to be sure. Its main purpose is to hide a hidden clockwork Castellan, which you need to destroy one of in each chapter to unlock a bonus knife for future playthroughs. Atmospherically though, this place is daunting. So when you return through the Insignia Gate and get ambushed by dog plagas, I don't think anyone was expecting that. It was a race to my boat because I knew I couldn't handle them. A terrifying end to this brief revisit of a familiar place. They knew just how to handle this sequence, fantastic. You can also return to the Del Lago dock and solve a simple slide puzzle for a treasure, and as mentioned in the Chapter 3 segment, you can re-enter the fish farm free of enemies, so if there's anything you left behind, do it now. Upon gaining the church key, we head back past the merchant and face El Gigante for the first time. In my first playthrough, I didn't save the dog, so I had to actually fight this guy head on. It was sad not having my furry friend with me, and thinking he was dead forever, until I beat the fight, googled it, and got annoyed that I missed such a simple moment. It's fine though, I made my boyfriend get the footage for me, so here's the doggo coming to save the day. El Gigante is intimidating on a first run, his attacks are large and sweeping. I hadn't worked out that distance was your best friend. You want to always make sure you're moving away from him and never backing yourself into a corner, or he could get you in his hand slam wombo combo and end your dreams. Aim for the face, get that plaga showing, and start the real fight. You can down him instantly with a flashbang once the plaga is out, giving you ample time to melee, and if the doggo is fighting with you, he'll distract El Gigante and even perform a scripted takedown where he bites the boss's ankle, followed by the boss charging into the cliff wall of the quarry and knocking himself over. It's satisfying to see, satisfying to take advantage of, and satisfying to beat. And for the love of God, grenade his ass when he starts picking up the wooden houses, or you're gonna be in for a real world of hurt. Finishing off El Gigante leaves you with the trip back to the church. You'll face another dog on the way, but if you did the optional fishing village, you'll be fine. And once in the church itself, there's the classic color puzzle, which I believe is improved from the original game, leading to your first meeting with Ashley Graham, and I already love that she's happy to candelabra your skull the moment you arrive. She's prepared, setting up the rest of the game beautifully. Chapter 4 takes my top spot for trying something new with its formula that hadn't been seen since Resident Evil 5's African tribal swampland level, and I'd love to see it done more. Makes me wish Resident Evil Village was formatted similarly, where you could have done any of the 4 lords in any order, but it wasn't meant to be. Resident Evil 9? The ball's in your court. Thank you everyone for watching. I wanted to make at least one video on the RE4 remake, even if it's not the type of content people on my channel are used to, but I hope I did the game some justice. I wanted an excuse to talk about all these different moments in game without doing a straight up review, and this was just the way I felt worked with my current content. My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. My Twitter is currently the only one worth checking though. A massive thank you to my patrons on Patreon for your unyielding support, and I'll see you all on Wednesday for my Dark Souls 2 boss ranking, part 2. Adios!